quick introduction about Hackerearth. We are a global company that helps large enterprises source, screen, interview, upskill, and continuously engage with developer and data science talent. Hackerearth for Enterprises is an integrated suite of solutions that empower companies to manage the entire developer lifecycle, start a skill-based hiring practice, and speed up their recruitment cycle using our data-rich coding assessments and real-time interviewing tool called FaceCode. Hackerearth is also a leading facilitator of online hackathons and coding challenges, where its community of over 5 million developers can upskill and practice for interviews, while companies can attract and source top developer talent globally. Today, we'll be talking about all things data. We have them in abundance. The recruiting landscape thrives in this. And while it's so crucial to your success as recruiters, it can actually be overwhelming to navigate through them. But there are smarter ways to use recruiting analytics and data to bolster your hiring model, right? So to give us expert advice on this topic, I have with me someone who has spent over 20 years in the industry perfecting this recruitment strategies using data and analytics. Will Bronaugh. Will is currently the Vice President of Talent Acquisition for Will.com, where he is responsible for leading and scaling the talent acquisition organization. He enjoys developing talent strategies, building teams, experimenting with new ideas, and enabling organizations to scale. None of which, Will says, could be accomplished without his deep passion and data and analytics. Will, welcome aboard. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Great. Thank you, Samantha. I'm glad to be here.
Perfect. So I think we're ready to begin, right? Will, before we get to the core of what we will be discussing today, which is data and analytics that can actually boost your recruitment strategy and how you can put them into application. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself? You started your career as, if I'm not wrong, a financial recruiter. And then from there, you built your way up to senior manager at Amazon, global director at Groupon and DocuSign, and today you're Vice President of Talent Acquisition. Can you walk us through that journey a little more?
Yeah, certainly, Samantha. Actually, I started my career right out of college at a technology consulting company as a recruiting coordinator. So I think I've held every role in recruiting throughout my career, all the way up to my current role. Early in my career, like you said, I started in financial recruiting, and the bulk of my experience has really been in tech recruiting or technical recruiting. Although I have done quite a bit of non-tech recruiting over the years. Early in my career, I remember hearing from a lot of the leaders that I'd be talking to or supporting is that, recruiting and HR didn't necessarily understand the business, and they didn't necessarily understand, the data and the analysis that was required to run a business, including the financials. And so I made a conscious decision a number of years ago, 15 plus years ago, to go back and get an MBA in finance and international business to really strengthen that analytical skills and the quantitative analysis abilities there. And so, over the years, I've just added more experience, leading larger teams, launching new businesses. In my little over 3 years at Amazon, I kicked off 12 new companies for Amazon, including the Prime 1 hour delivery business, scaling out some new products at AWS as well. And so, I've really focused my career on building, expanding, turning around recruiting organizations. And all of that has, been possible with the use of, really strong data, being able to communicate that data to leaders, being able to create shared accountability in that partnership with using those analytics. And so at this point, I've led recruiting organizations throughout the Americas, EMEA, APAC, and currently, as you mentioned, I'm leading recruiting at Bill.com. Just a great opportunity to kind of bring all of these skills together to expand and help a company like Bill go through a rapid change and rapid growth cycle within their business.
Right. And, we're talking about 20 years of experience. That's 2 whole decades. And, with such a long and elaborated, extensive journey that you've been through, there's definitely so much that has changed over the years in the industry itself, right? Especially when we talk about recruiting processes, hiring models, how they've evolved over the years, strategies, and even, let's say, access to data and analytics. I'm sure, we've come a long way since, there's always something changing. There's always new avenues to tap into. So can you share a little bit more about how the entire recruiting landscape overall has transitioned since then?
Yeah, I think it's gone, recruiting over the last 20 plus years has really moved from very much a transactional kind of order taker type of industry to much more of, needing to really be ingrained with the business, really needing to create those strong relationships with candidates in particular. And so, part of that is, being able to manage for more efficiencies to actually create more time for recruiters to be able to spend with the candidates and the hiring managers in an advisory capacity. And so, we've seen a lot of that. There's also been, rapid growth in, the change in technologies of which we've used. When I started my career, a lot of it was just cold calling candidates, and we've, advanced into, online job boards, to LinkedIn, to other tools that are out there that really help us to connect, with candidates, in a little bit more of an effective way. So I think those are all just some major changes I've seen. I think it's also, we've seen a really a big shift in terms of the competitive landscape, for particularly technology talent, across the globe. And it really is a global recruiting market these days, that we have to focus on too.
Right. Right. And it's interesting that you say, we've moved from a time when recruiters would be order takers, right? It would just purely be transactional. And then we've evolved so much from there. And now recruitment analytics are widely used by companies, right? Because normally they'd have a comprehensive set of metrics that they'd have to report on, whether it's for a client or whether it's for internal tracking purposes. And because of that dependence on recruiting analytics, we see a huge increase in internal recruiting teams actually using analytic tools. But there are still a lot of recruiters out there who are going to get around to it, right? The reason often cited for not extensively using analytics or data is not because they simply don't want to, right? But because they're too busy doing their day-to-day recruitment, right? So there's not always time to go beyond that and look at data and analytics and actually believe that it can help you act on them. So according to you, Will, why should a recruiter who's not excessively using analytics today, why should that recruiter care or give top priority to data analytics?
Yeah, I think, really analytics allows the recruiting leaders, but also recruiters to understand things like, the recruiter pipeline efficiency, which creates more time for the recruiters to actually do other things, just than the sourcing component or the recruiting component, like work on, additional strategic projects that help to really advance the recruiting organization. And so you look at things like pipeline efficiency, productivity of the recruiters. We look at things like recruiter capacity planning, and really, the data is useful there because I hear from a lot of the teams that I've either inherited or built that, the recruiters they're so overwhelmed with, too many requisitions or, hiring managers putting a lot of pressure on them to fill recs faster, to fill recs and to see more candidates quicker. And, and a lot of that just comes down to the organizations not having the right level of recruiting capacity. And so part of having that data is to really say, this is what recruiter productivity really looks like. This is what the attrition data looks like. This is what our true capacity to hire, whether that's on a monthly basis, a quarterly basis, or an annualized basis, looks like. And so part of the reason why they should care in that is, it really just helps them to, to have a manageable workload. And I think recruiting leaders really need to understand that as well in order to take care of their teams and make sure that they're, not creating an environment where recruiters are getting burned out. The other thing about that is it also is a great way to create accountability back to the hiring managers. Data is a really powerful tool. You can't argue with the data if it's correct, right? And so when you're sitting down with the hiring manager, you can have those conversations that say, hey, listen, this is what the external market looks like. these are the number of candidates that we presented to you. This is what the pass-through rates of those candidates look like. Your pipeline is really inefficient. There may be something off with calibration. There may be something off with, the requirements of the skills or the requirements of the role, or maybe they're not aligned with what the market is sharing. You can also use that to go back and say, listen, we're seeing a lot of declined offers in this particular area. Maybe we should review something like our compensation models in order to become more competitive. So it's really just another tool in the recruiter's toolkit to help manage accountability, to help move the process along. I think the biggest thing too is that it's just another way to influence, particularly when you're talking about partnering with engineering leaders or tech leaders. Most of those leaders, in my experience, are incredibly driven by data. They're driven by process. And so to be able to talk to them in a way that, that resonates with them, that says, look, here's the data. This is what we've done to root cause some of the challenges. It brings a lot of credibility to the conversation. And so, for me, I kind of learned that really early on and have just built on that over the years. And I try to teach that to my staff as well. And so we're very much a data-driven organization within my teams. And it actually helps the conversations, just go a little bit better.
Right. So basically it's all about, helping you be accountable as a recruiter. And it also gives you a lot of material to go back to your hiring manager and sort of study the current market. It highlights trends in the talent market out there and tells you what's working and what's not working. Besides that, I really like, what you spoke about, how it can help you be more influencing in your role. I think a lot of recruiters on the call, and I do see a lot of familiar names who've been part of our prior webinars and prior conversations about how you can build yourself as an influencer recruiter, and data is one key way of achieving that, right? I do have a follow-up question here, Will. When you actually get down to the granular facts, so we spoke about how it can actually help a recruiter, but when we get down to the granular facts, how does it really improve the hiring process overall?
Yeah, I think there's just having the data allows you to your point, look at the trends that are there. You really want to think about how can you measure every step of the recruitment process, from looking at your candidate reach out data to looking at the pipeline metrics to understand the efficiency of that pipeline, to understanding things like offer to accept rates, to see if there's any negative trends that are going on there. When I look at it, it's really about, it creates visibility for both the leaders. It creates visibility for the recruiters and the recruiting leadership team. And when I really think about the buckets of data, it's really those three. And so it allows us, at least here, to really figure out where there may be those challenges. It allows us to then say, okay, what are things that we can do to improve how we're operating? And it's even looking at things like candidate experience data, which is something that we look at pretty regularly to say, are we creating the right experience for candidates in a really competitive market? And so there's a lot of, I think everything that we do in recruiting is, it's basically a large, supply chain. And so we have the demand, we go out and we have to create the supply of talent for the business. And so being able to, like I said, measure kind of all of those steps, really derive the insight from the data, it just helps us get better. It also is a great tool to set expectations with leaders, so even senior leaders. So something that that we do here is we really look at aligning our how we talk about the data in much more of a business way, kind of how we talk about it to our engineering leaders, but also to our finance leaders. And so, it helps us with the capacity planning. It helps us to track our gap to plan, or our progress of plan against each one of our goals, and that we can actually report out on that. And so, I love having the conversations with leaders when they say we're behind, and you can go and say, well, actually, you're not behind. You're ahead of plan. Based on what the data is saying. So again, just helps to enable the recruiters and facilitate those conversations, but also create that, create that insight.
Right. And, you did mention about how data can help you measure the progress that you make in recruiting, and it helps measure your entire effort across the board. And it reminded me, so I read this article a few weeks ago on the importance of measuring things that are critical to your business, right? And I think it ties back to what you were talking about, because the article said that if you wanted to start an argument and about whether data is crucial and whether you need to really measure everything that you do, I think there's nothing better than telling someone that if you don't measure it, then you can't manage it. And you can't manage what you don't measure, right? So it makes a lot of sense. I think to add to what you also said, I think using data actually highlights the difference between average candidate experience and great candidate experience, right? And it also tells you what's working, what's not working, and sort of give you solutions to fix that. For people getting started, for recruiters actually, getting started navigating through the massive volume of data out there, there could be, a common feeling among them, or sort of hesitance around it being too time consuming, right? Out of the day-to-day recruitment. So is it time consuming? Is analyzing data, sort of weaving it into your day-to-day, is that going to buy recruiters, take away a lot of time from recruiters? And if yes, how do you actually make time outside your day-to-day to focus on the analytics?
Yeah, I think it ultimately, it's a little bit of upfront work to get the data, but in the end, it actually I think will save recruiters time. The one thing I would say is, recruiting leaders really should be taking kind of the ownership of, enabling the recruiters themselves to have the data. So for example, here and at other organizations I've walked into, really the first thing I do is I meet with my HRIS team. I look at what kind of data I have in maybe the applicant tracking system, and I meet with finance. And I really create that top level view of, what are the goals and the targets that the recruiting team needs to meet, and start there. And then, go downstream and say, okay, do we have enough capacity for the recruiters to do the work and to deliver on the work? And, we look at things like, attrition data. We look at, recruiter productivity. And then kind of the next level is, creating that visibility for the recruiters. And, there's a lot of data that comes in. And so the hardest part that I've seen is, you might have the data, but you might not know where it is. And so that first step is to really uncover where you're going to find it, and then aggregate it, and then figure out, okay, how do you take all of this aggregated data and make it useful? Because data without being able to do the analysis or tell the story is really not very valuable. It's just, it's just there, right? And so what I like to share with recruiters is understand what the problem is that you're trying to solve, and find out, can you talk through this problem using data? You might have an assumption, for example, that candidates are declining offers maybe because of compensation. Well, what does the data tell you about that? How do you prove that assumption, right? I think inherently recruiters are really curious about what's going on with their candidates, what's going on with their business. And so really using that intellectual curiosity to figure out, everything that comes up, how can I solve it, in a quantitative manner? And so part of that too is going to their leaders and saying, listen, where do I go to get this data? Where do I go to, do we have an analyst on the team that I can go to and say, hey, can you go out and pull my candidate pipeline reports? Can you, pull a requisition report with, how long have the positions been open, and look at, maybe one of the challenging roles to identify, okay, is there really an issue with this? And so there's all kinds of different ways that you can use it. I think the key is, just identifying where to find it, what you need to solve a particular problem, then how do you try to do it with data? And so really the best way to get there in my mind is you create a lot of structure around it, but make it, my job is to make it easily consumable for the recruiters to actually use it. Maybe not necessarily making it their responsibility to always find it, but also saying, look, these are some key things that we think would be really helpful for you to use.
Right, right. And, when you spoke about sort of, normalizing the use of data across teams and getting everyone in your team to actually look at data the same way you would look at data, right? What happens when you see some kind of reluctance from the team? Do you have tips on how you can get your entire team on board to actually give data analytics equal importance?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. What's in it for the recruiters? How is it going to make their lives easier? And then how is it going to make them doing their jobs more effective, right? So to me, data is nothing more than an enabler. And so once you present it in that fashion, it really, the argument is made. The other thing is, I think, really encouraging the recruiters to use it, providing, we provide some brown bags around, hey, here's where you find the data. This is what it can tell you. This is how you use it. So there is a bit of a training aspect to it. It's one of those things too that you don't start out necessarily being good at it. It's a muscle that you have to build over time. And the more you use it and the more that you're in the data, over time, you'll get, just like with anything, you'll get stronger at the ability to use it. And so, I think that's really my advice is, find it, make it readily available to the team, consistently reinforce the message of why it's important, how to use it, even providing support as a leader, or, even there are usually people on the team that are really good at it, making them available to others on the team for some peer coaching. Again, kind of evangelizing that. I think it starts at the top though. I think if you have a TA leader, they need to really highlight the importance of it. It's also great to just show the recruiting team, a lot of the wins, to say, listen, here's the data. We've had a fantastic quarter. We've had a fantastic year, and being able to just sort of showcase, the good things that are coming from the team.
Right. Right. So basically reinforcing the importance of, data and analytics and, like you mentioned, operational metrics for any recruiting professional can be at their fingertips within seconds of it being requested, and if take the right way. And this can be a good thing. It can be a great thing even. But let's also talk about data limitations for a minute. I know you touched upon this briefly, Will. You said data alone won't tell you everything you need to know to solve your problems, right? There's a big difference between simply looking at metrics and also taking a deep dive into the analytics to find valuable insights and actually act on them. So when do you identify these limitations, and how do you identify these limitations and act on them?
Yeah, I think understanding what you have is the first part, right? Again, I talked a little bit about starting with your finance partners, starting with your HRIS, looking at your ATS, then really kind of do that gap analysis. That'll really inform you as to, what do you have? What do you need to build? What do you need to create? Or where are the gaps, right? In a lot of cases, the data is there, but you just have to kind of aggregate it into, one location and then make it useful for the recruiters. I would also recommend, start simple. Create some of those top line reports, like the gap to plan, the capacity models, even, some pipeline funnel reporting. And that's going to really help you look at the team in a holistic approach. When I think about data, there's data for the business, data for the internal recruiting team, and then data for the recruiters. And so kind of breaking it out into that type of fashion will really help you frame it up. And then, the other way is to just really create that as a repeatability, right? Everything that you do, you don't want to have it as an ad hoc report. It doesn't create efficiencies in the process. And so you want to create, easily, reports that are out there. You run them on a schedule. You give everyone access, and that's how you're really going to create adoption and scale. But yeah, I mean, there's always the limitations, and sometimes you just have to be okay with the ambiguity of not having some of the data. And then, a lot of times what I'll see is we use a lot of trend data And if you are coming into a newer organization, for example, Bill.com, we didn't have a ton of analytics when I started 4 months ago. And so what that meant is we didn't have trend data. And so we really could have used, trailing 12-month data around things like attrition or recruiter productivity or the hiring kind of the pace or the velocity, but we didn't have it. And so we kind of had to make some assumptions based on best practices or benchmark data. And so, sometimes you just have to go with what you know or what your leadership knows, plug that in and say, okay, look, over time, now we have 4 months worth of trend data. You know what, 6 months from now, we'll have 10 months of trend data. And so really being okay with having a little bit of that ambiguity. And, the great thing about data is the more you have of it, the more you can refine it and the more you can refine your analytics. And so I think you got to be okay with that because you have to start somewhere. And so that's, those are some of the limitations, I think, that you just have to, you have to recognize them. You have to be okay with it, but know that, it is a bit of a longer term journey.
Right. So, Will, can you maybe walk us through a recruitment project you led that was, where data and analytics actually played a very important role?
Yeah, I can say, when I came on board here, we really did not have, like I mentioned, a whole lot of data. Rarely do I do anything or my leaders do anything that don't have some kind of, analytics around them. But when I started here, there was, like I said, pretty minimal. And we didn't even know what the hiring targets were. And so, we had to sit down with our finance partners to understand, okay, what does the hiring targets look like by month, by quarter, by year? We had to then sit down with HR to say, hey, what does the attrition look like? Because it's really easy to say for the business to say, wow, recruiting, you've got to go out and you've got to fill, all of these new positions. But sometimes they don't take into account the fact that there's attrition that recruiting also has to fill. And so really highlighting what those numbers look like and combining that. And that's how we came up with our model that says, okay, this is how many we need to hire by business area on a quarterly basis, on a yearly basis. And then from there, we would take that and we would plug it into a model that says, okay, we've got our attrition modeled. We know, how many, based on recruiter productivity benchmarks and frankly, just, kind of that ambiguity I talked about. We just used some assumptions that we as a leadership team and that I had previously. And we said, okay, this is how many recruiters we need to meet these hiring targets on a quarterly basis, on a yearly basis. And then taking that to the finance and taking that to my leadership team and saying, this is what I need from a recruiting hiring standpoint. And we did that and we built our entire recruiting organization around that capacity plan. And so what that allowed us to do was it allowed us to make a business case to go out and hire. I think we grew the team by about 15 recruiters in 90 days. We hired, a business intelligence engineer to help us with this. We hired a TA ops person, a campus person. And so what that's been able to do is our fiscal year ends at the end of this month. And we're going to finish our hiring year at 98% to the hiring plan. Prior to us thinking along those ways, they'd never made more than 85% of their plan. And so just by taking that analytical approach and that approach using the data that we had, we were able to really make a significant change in how we were operating for the business.
Right. 98%. I think that's brilliant. And, while you also shared about, the approach you took around the whole project, could you maybe, share a little bit more about the specific strategies you used? What kind of data metrics did you actually rely on to measure the success? And more from a recruiter standpoint, more about how data and analytics can help recruiters. What kind of data or metrics should they actually keep track of, or strategies that they can adopt?
Yeah, it's really, as I mentioned, I really like from a strategy is really trying to align your metrics and your analytics to how the business talks about them. And so we really think about, when we talk about our recruiting measurements, we talk about it in almost like a way like a finance team would talk about it. We talk about things like, our progress as a gap against plan. We talk about, we're forecasting our hiring. We're looking at, plan versus actual. So, what we were supposed to hire versus what we actually hired. And we really communicate the information in that way. When you kind of break it down to like, what are some of the things that we use? We look at a lot of just the standard things out there. What's our progress? We look at, we use our turnover data a lot. One of the things that we do with turnover data, and what I've just grown accustomed to, is I really like to use a trailing 12-month turnover analysis. And so that way your data is always keeping a track with kind of the turnover trends. And so we put that into how we look at things. We also look at, kind of the pass-through rates within the recruiting process. We look at, as I mentioned before, spend a lot of time at recruiter capacity data. We spend a lot of time around looking at what's the actual numbers that the recruiters are hiring on a quarter-over-quarter basis, to kind of stay aligned to say, okay, are we on track with plan? Are we getting behind? But it also uncovers some of those challenges that might be arising in the market. We look at, other things like, how long is a candidate in a certain stage of the interview process? And, really being able to say, okay, we know we then are able to identify where the choke points are. The biggest thing is you hear from hiring managers, recruiting's taking too long. Well, almost all of the time I've ever seen, when you do the analysis, there's always a gap between, when a recruiter submits a candidate, maybe the hiring manager is not getting back to them, or it's taking too long to get a hiring team on an interview schedule. And when you really show them the amount of time that it's taking throughout the whole process, it really changes the conversation. It also actually drives accountability for them to move faster. So we use that kind of information to really manage the process. We also look at things like offer to acceptance rates, just to kind of see how we're doing in the marketplace. One of the things that we don't use, and I really am not a big fan, is it's an old metric. It's really a transactional metric of time to fill. The reason we don't necessarily use time to fill is it's kind of an obsolete number. It really is more, it prioritizes speed at times over quality. And so it's a great number to have. Days open on a requisition is a great number to have, because if you see a requisition that's open for 200 days, it's a red flag, and it allows you to go in and do a root cause analysis of, why is this requisition so old? Is it recruiting? Is it the hiring team's not calibrated? Is it, the compensation's off? Are they trying to take, two skills and blend it into one position? And so it's really just a, kind of an indicator. And so the other thing that I would say that we're using more and more of is external market data. There are a couple of products out there where you can go out and you can say, for example, okay, I want to see software engineers in this geographic location. What is my population around this type of software engineer skill set? And you can pull that down, and it'll tell you things as rich as, there's X amount of candidates in the marketplace. It'll give you a demographics of male versus female. So if you're looking at your diversity and inclusion data, there's certainly that. And so we do use that quite a bit when we're going either into new markets, or if we're really looking at hiring in another location. But then we will use it occasionally for kind of more niche skill sets. And that also helps us a lot for our diversity recruiting efforts too. The last thing I'll say about that is really starting to measure the diversity of your candidate pipeline is becoming more and more important for organizations, and certainly here. And so we are spending a lot of time at looking at, what does that look like? How do we improve things like our on-site interviews or now virtual interviews for minorities and females within the candidate pipeline? And that's really kind of the bigger buckets that we look at.
Right. That was quite an interesting and I must say unique point of view when you mentioned that the metric time to fill is actually an obsolete metric, because you see a lot of companies prioritizing that metric to actually measure success. But it made a lot of sense when you said that metric can actually prioritizes speed over quality. And I think a lot of recruiters sort of struggle with that, right? Struggle to get a lot of candidates to fill a particular role, to source a lot of candidates, to screen them. So I think that was a very interesting point that you brought up, Will.
Yeah, I think it is. It's, it's an indicator, right? That time to fill or days open is an indicator. It's just one of those metrics that, allows you to gain insight. The one thing that and really why I say it's a bit obsolete is, and that might be a bit of a contrarian viewpoint, but I think for me, when you're looking at metrics, it needs to measure the desired outcome. And so speed at times is not the desired outcome. For organizations, I really think that there's a cost and there's a time loss of making a bad hire. And so taking a little bit more time to hire the right person and focus on the quality hire versus the speed of hire is, to me, is far more important in the long run.
Right. And you also spoke about, much earlier in the conversation around how data can actually help recruiters build reports and take it back to hiring managers and actually sort of get a seat at the decision-making table, because you're actually influencing them with accurate data to sort of make the ultimate hiring decision. So, if you could offer a piece of advice on what kind of recruiting data can help recruiters build reports for hiring managers, how can they collect them, what can they include in them, and how can they eventually apply them?
Yeah, I think a lot of hiring managers, there's this interesting, thing is that they sometimes associate recruiting with activity versus outcome. And so, activity is when a hiring manager says, how many candidates are in the pipeline? How many phone screens did you do today? Versus what's the outcome, right? And so to me, I don't like to go to hiring leaders and say, we did X amount of phone screens, you did X amount of, X amount of activity based. It's more of, okay, listen, here's the efficiency of our process. And so for me, I would rather, at least for recruiters on my team, if a recruiter can submit 4 candidates to get 1 hire, then that's a fantastic outcome versus getting 10 candidates to the hiring manager to get 1 hire, right? That's a fairly inefficient process. And so, being able to use pipeline data to tell that story, or for a recruiter to tell that story, to say with the hiring manager, okay, listen, I know you keep saying that you want more resumes and more candidates, which is so common, but you don't need more candidates. If you can see this, we're submitting 4 candidates. For every 4 candidates, you're interviewing 3, you're hiring 1. Or offering 2, hiring 1, right? Whatever the pass-through rates are. So I think that's something that really helps kind of facilitate that conversation. I think that also speaks more to quality over quantity. And I think it actually shifts the conversation from a recruiter to being that transactional kind of high volume type of exercise to much more of selective understanding, the business, understanding the roles, and saying, look, if we can do less to get the same outcome, why wouldn't we do that? That's just more efficient. So I think that's one thing that recruiters can do from a reporting standpoint. The time and stage, we talked about that. Again, really being able to go to hiring manager. And I remember as a line recruiter, I would have to have these hard conversations with managers saying, I've sent you 4 candidates. You've taken 2 weeks to get back to me, but then you're complaining about we're not moving fast enough. And so it really shifts a little bit of the balance of power in the conversation, from recruiter being sort of put back on their, on their heels as just sort of, being a kind of a supplier, to say, no, this really is a partnership. And so I think that's a great one, right? Being able to have those conversations. And here's the great thing about it. It doesn't have to be a contentious conversation. The data actually kind of neutralizes the contentiousness, because it's just a fact. You can say, here's the information. These are the facts. And the data tells the story for you. And so that's another thing I would say is just great for recruiters to use. I think, the diversity data, there's a lot of focus right now on diversity and inclusion, across the boards, as it should be, to really being able to go to a manager and say, listen, here's what your diversity hiring looks like. Here's what your candidate pipeline looks like. We're seeing candidates maybe dropping out of the process that are more diverse, or we're not seeing enough coming into the process. And so that's always kind of top of mind for our organizations. And really, it's all about just being able to help set some of those expectations and help to continue to move the process forward.
Right. I think at the end of the day, it all boils down to being more consultative in your approach as a recruiter, right? So you're actually partnering with your hiring managers and not just being transactional, and data helps you actually get there. So you did mention about certain analytic tools that recruiters and talent acquisition specialists can benefit from. And of course, internally, if you have a data guy sitting next to you, it's they have their work cut out for them, and you have an easy access to access this data. But are there tools or platforms that you recommend that in your experience have actually worked well for you in terms of giving you the kind of data-rich insights around recruiting?
Yeah, I would say, before you go and look at your external tools, right? What do you have internally? I mean, the ATS system it's full of so much rich data. It can be incredibly helpful. The one thing I would say is it usually, if you really are going to get serious around using your ATS, it has to be clean data. There has to be a focus on recruiters from an operational excellence standpoint to, making sure that their candidates are in there, moving them through the stages, making sure that offer information is captured and even offer decline information captured. What we've seen is there's, always the first step when you're using your ATS is really you have to go in and clean it up. You have to clean it up. You have to create the change management of recruiters using it, hiring managers using it. And so I would say recommend, starting there. And then I think the other thing is, your HRIS data. You can typically get reports of your current headcount by business area. A lot of times we align our headcount with cost centers so that we can see, what cost centers, what their headcount is. We can get the current staff levels there, or headcount levels there. We can get usually attrition from there. And, there's certainly, that's certainly, kind of the source of most of what we get actually. And then, there are some external tools to go out and gather that market data. One of the ones that we use here is we use LinkedIn Talent Insights, and it will actually go out and give you kind of that demographic breakdown. There's a couple of them out there that I've used in the past. Talent Insights really is kind of been the one we've used here simply because we have an enterprise license with them that really helps us as well. And so, that's one example. But what we're really doing here is we're taking a different approach. We're kind of building our own tool. And so I would encourage you, if you're getting serious about really wanting to, have analytics as, a linchpin of your, your recruiting process, to say, I went out and I hired one of my first hires here was I hired a senior level business intelligence engineer. And so we're actually working with our IT team to build a data warehouse. And so all of our ATS information, some of our HRIS information, some of the information that we already have is going to be, basically piped into a data warehouse or a data lake, converted into a data warehouse. And then we'll have some visualization tools that sit on top of it. And I would say that's going to be a huge component of how you use your data. If your ATS can give you good visualization, then great. I've not seen a ton of ATS systems that can do it really as well as creating your own data warehouse and using tools like, for example, we use a tool here called Looker. A lot of companies, and I've used this before, Tableau is another great visualization tool. There's a bunch of them out there, but I think that's where it really comes down to the importance of being able to tell the story. And charts and graphs and tables are in many cases far more powerful in telling the story than, kind of just that data in a, PowerPoint presentation. And so the other thing around that is when we think about the tools that we're using, what I'm building, and I'm talking to my business engineer, is we think about it as we're building a product. It's no different than, a company like a Bill.com building a product. We have We have our, our requirements that we've got. We've got project timelines, and we're building a product that we can actually use within Bill.com, or we did it at Amazon, we did it at DocuSign, that says, hey, here's really the product that you're going to use, business leaders to access all of your data.
Right. Well, thank you for that, Will. And I know we've got about 15 minutes on the clock left, and we're going to be moving to Q&A. But just before we move to Q&A, I do have one last question. Will, if you were to offer about 2 to 3 best practices, share 2 to 3 best practices around, identifying and actually applying data in your day-to-day recruitment to everyone who's dialed in right now, what would that be?
Yeah, I think it goes a little bit back to, the best practices, I would say, is just really understanding what you have first, understanding what you need to solve the business problems, talking about it in a way that aligns to the business stakeholders that you're working with. And I think that's kind of the higher level approach. Kind of at a little bit more of a tactical level, I think it's, making sure that you're measuring what is important to the team. There's a lot of data out there, and it can get, you can very easily start to measure things that really don't matter and really don't drive change. And the whole point of being able to measure and use analytics is to influence, to create change, and to drive whatever the business challenges are, or the business goals are, forward. And so I think kind of keeping that in mind. And the great thing about it is, when you have the data, you get to tell the story. You get to position that and tell the story and use it in a way that you want to use it. And I think over time, you'll figure out how best to use it based on kind of the environment of the company or the team or whatever you're trying to solve for.
All right. Thank you for that, Will. I think with that, we're ready for some audience Q&A. We have one from Aniket. How can we implement data analytics in a growing organization where there are different and more important expenses to prioritize?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and it is a challenge, right? There's always resource constraints. I think you just have to start with what you have. For example, we don't have our data warehouse platform built here yet. We're working on it, but we just started with Google Sheets. We set up some Google Sheets. We manually gathered the data from the sources that we had, and we just started to build things. And some of it was, by trial and error. We actually built a couple of models that we found out were completely flawed, and we figured it out. And we're like, oh wait, we hadn't accounted for this in our models. And that's part of the fun, to me at least, and that's part of the learning process of kind of working through that. So there is always a little bit of that nature of just needing to be really scrappy. But I think you just start to build stuff, and then if you don't have that data analytics within your current organization, there's no you can only go up, right? And so even if you start simple and you present that to the business, I guarantee you'll get a positive reaction. And then you get that feedback and you go in and you tweak it, and maybe you change the Google Sheet. Maybe you add things to the Google Sheet. Analytics is not a static process. It's actually an iterative process, just like how you build software. And so when you start to think about that and take it in smaller chunks, it makes it less daunting. And so I think that my advice to you is just start with something, even if you have to use an Excel sheet or Google Sheets or, pulling things together, that's one approach. The other thing that I can tell you is, if you have an engineering or a technology organization, try to get folks that are in your corner. Try to get advocates for helping to create better TA analytics. Go to an engineering manager and say, hey, listen, I'm really trying to build this. I don't have the capability on my team. Do you have somebody that could give me 5 hours of their time to sit down and maybe help me build something. And I guarantee you, if you can show it to them, like what's in it for them and why you're doing that, they'll help you. And so sometimes you just have to go around and get the help for folks just to lean in and help you. Kind of a scrappy approach, but it works. And then, as you get more credibility with your analytics, all of a sudden there's a more of a willingness to invest in it, typically over time.
All right, I think we have one from Annabelle. How do you recommend your tech recruiters to level up their tech recruitment skills? How do you make sure to be up to date in technology with it being such a fast-paced world?
So if I understand the question, it was, how do you encourage your recruiters to up level the use of technology? Is that
right? So there are two questions. How do you encourage your tech recruiters to actually level up their recruitment skills, their tech recruitment skills, and how do you actually make sure that you as a team are up to date with technology?
Yeah, so I think from an up-leveling skill set, I think there's a couple of things that I like to do. It's one, encourage recruiters, and give recruiters the opportunity to learn. Give them the opportunity to go into stretch assignments. When I look at my recruiting models, I really just enjoy hiring recruiters that are kind of just their best athletes, right? And so when I look for recruiters in the hiring profile, I look for recruiters that, they have a good foundation of how they recruit. They have a good approach. They have that intellectual curiosity, but then they also have the learning agility for them to say, okay, you know what? You might be working on, front-end engineer recruiting today, but we're going to move you over to DevOps. And, yes, we know you haven't done that before, but it's going to give you an opportunity to learn. So I think that's one way, is just putting people in those stretch roles is one way. Again, sometimes partnering up with other recruiters that have maybe that are more senior. So I love to partner more junior recruiters up with more senior recruiters, because there's a great peer learning opportunity there. I think there's also conference and there's opportunities to send recruiters to conferences. But even then, that's a fairly expensive proposition. But even then, looking for opportunities for recruiters to do things like this, like attend a webinar. It's an hour out of their day, and they can pick up. If they pick up one tip, then great. I always do say, if I do send a recruiter to a conference, they have to come back and teach the recruiting team what they learned when they come back. And so that's one of the ways I do that. I think hopefully that addressed the first question. And the second question, Samantha, was keeping people up to date on new technologies.
Yes. How do you stay up to date with the changing technology?
Yeah, I think there's again, lots of learning opportunities. My role as a leader is I try to keep my pulse on new technologies. And I think a great way to actually keep people current is encourage recruiters to go out and look for tools and maybe do a demo with a product. We had a recent sourcing product that we just purchased, and I knew it was a great product, but we had a handful of our recruiters just go do a demo on it. And they came back and they're like, oh my gosh, we want this product. And so we went out and bought it. And so I think that's one way to kind of keep recruiters up to date. You can also, if you see as a leader, see something that looks interesting, send it to one of the recruiters that is really interested in maybe technology or new sourcing platforms or whatever that might be, and let them do a bit of a review on it. And so I think that, just kind of looking at those things, there's obviously, there's like recruiting technology conferences. I'm sure those are probably a great way. I've never attended them. I've not really sent recruiters to it. But again, I think it's just all about, kind of guiding as a leader, guiding some of the recruiters to it. But then it's also, getting a group of recruiters that are really excited about a particular technology for the team, and then having them evangelize it, having them go out and, help the other members of the team adopt it or do training on it. One of the things that we do here is I actually have a recruiting roadmap or a recruiting tech stack roadmap. And so we created a tech stack for our recruiting team, very similar to how you would if you were a product organization. And so, those are the kind of things that just sort of, we constantly are reviewing new technology. We're constantly having recruiters review technologies. And, that's proven to be, fairly useful for us.
Right. And it looks like we have quite a lot of questions. So coming in. We're going to try and address them in the few minutes that we have in the clock. So the next one's from Michael. In reality, how important is social media in recruiting? We know that LinkedIn is valuable, but is there any data that says that Facebook or Instagram or Twitter has any value?
You know, I don't have a specific answer on do I have any data around that. I do have experience. You know, my personal opinion is I think that those things are helpful, but really more as a lever to create a better talent brand. So, you know, LinkedIn really is much more of a recruiting focused. You know, things like having a really strong Facebook page, you know, a corporate Instagram account, or, you know, even having, you know, recruiters or people within your company, you know, on Twitter, tweeting things that are relevant. I think it's useful. You know, I think that's a component to creating the talent brand. You know, when you look at social media, I mean, I don't know this would be considered really social media, but you look at things like Glassdoor. Glassdoor is incredibly important for creating your talent brand. And so I put Facebook and you know, those kinds of things sort of in that same category of, you know, more useful for branding than I think actual recruiting. But let's face it, if you don't have a strong talent brand, you're not going to be able to attract the recruits. I will tell you that's a huge opportunity for us here at Bill.com, is to really improve our talent brand. And so we're looking at a number of different things to help us, you know, get our message out there. We have one of the coolest CEOs I've ever worked for. And, you know, we really want to highlight, you know, you know, just what a great founder and CEO he is. And so we're looking at things on how do we do that as well.
All right. And there's another question from Stephanie. How often should you review TA analytics with hiring managers?
Every week. And I'm actually, you know, part of me is serious around that, but I think really every conversation that a recruiter has with a hiring manager, you know, if you're doing your weekly sync with them, you know, yeah, you can talk through the requisitions, but part of that should be, you know, what does your pipeline look like? What's the data showing? What are some of the key analytics? Because I think that's going to really, again, it goes back to the more you talk about it, the more, you know, the better you get as a recruiter, the more accustomed the hiring managers get to see you as approaching them with data, approaching them with insight. And so I would say any opportunity you get, you should be talking to hiring managers and using data as part of those conversations.
All right. There's one from Sunita. She says, you know, the market generally right now for in the tech space is quite disruptive. So do you have any advice on what specific social media activities tech recruiters could use or sort of experiment with to attract tech talent?
So Samantha, can you repeat the first part of that question?
So do you have any advice around specific social media activities that tech recruiters could use to attract talent in the tech space?
Yeah, you know, I think one, it's important that you have, you know, a good brand on, you know, the social media platforms, as I talked about, you know, good, and not just a recruiting brand, but your corporate brand, I think is critical. You know, being able to tell the story around who you are as a company, and why a candidate should come work for you. I think equally important is making sure that, you know, that you're telling about the diversity of your company or the importance of diversity and inclusion within your organization. So I think that's one thing. I think the other thing, and really the biggest thing I've ever seen that makes a difference, is how you're interacting and how you're reaching out to a candidate. So really crafting your reach out messages to candidates. Nothing is worse, and I've gotten them as a recruiter, as a leader, when you get, you know, a recruiter that sends out a very generic email about a job, or they're trying to source, and you know that they just put 100 candidates in their, you know, in their LinkedIn project and just blasted them with one message. I would say that is, you know, it's a terrible approach. And the approach would be, you know what, find 10 candidates that are really spot on for what you're looking for craft a personalized message, craft the message of, why would you want to come work here? Here's what we're going to offer. I don't mean compensation, but here's what this job, here's what this company, here's what this position offers, and really pitch it to them that way that, hey, I love your background. And, this is what I think we might be able to offer you as part of your career. I guarantee you will have a much higher response rate. Although, look, you're right. The tech market right now is as hot as I've ever seen it in 20 plus years of being in this business. And so, the response rates are going down, but I do think that if you have a more personalized approach, they will actually, that'll help. So.
All right. Will, thank you for that. I think we're down to just one last question, and this one should sum up. Any suggestions on sourcing products that provide good data? And same question for ATS systems.
So ATS products and products that provide good data is the question?
Yes.
Look, I think there's a lot of applicant tracking systems out there. I've used a bunch of them. In general, I think it really depends on your organization. If you are a 100-person organization, then, some of the big ATS systems might be too much. If you are a 10,000-person organization, some of the ATS systems, you might have outgrown. I think what you have to do is, and I've actually purchased and implemented, probably 4 or 5 different ATS systems, and I actually used to consult with companies around what ATS systems they should purchase. My advice to you on that is, create a requirements list as to what you need as a company, and then go out and look at your ATS, look at the ATS marketplace. The one thing I'll say to you too is, as your organization evolves, you may need to revisit what your ATS system is. For example, we have one ATS system today. We may be looking at, 2 or 3 years down the road, replacing that, for something else that helps us to scale better. So that's my advice on that. As far as other products that give you good analytics, I mean, there's a whole bunch out there. I talked about the LinkedIn Talent Insights. There's a product, I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. It's a Gartner product that provides external talent analytics. Like I said, I can't remember what it is. I used it a number of years ago. I'm sure there's some other things out there as well. I think just, do a quick Google search and kind of put in what you're looking for, and that should help.
All right. Well, that was our last question, and that brings us to the end of the webinar. We're at the top of the hour already. So Will, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, your strategies and valuable insights. I think I speak for everyone here when I say that we're definitely walking away with a lot more understanding on the practical application of data, the importance of it, and how we can actually sort of feed that into our day-to-day recruitment. So thank you again, Will. And is there anything else you would like to add before we wrap up?
No, thank you, Samantha, for including me. Thanks everybody for being on the panel. I would just say, parting words, just start somewhere, get in and just, start the process of doing it. And I promise it'll have a huge impact on your role in your business. So thank you.
All right, great. Thank you, Will. It was definitely a pleasure hosting you today. And thanks to everyone who attended as well. We hope you enjoyed the session, and we'd love to hear your feedback on the survey form that you will receive soon after this event. This is your host, Samantha, signing off. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.